and Stine Geisler was an 18-year-old political science student at Aarhus University. She was originally from Hellerup, a wealthy suburb north of Copenhagen. Those who knew her described her as intelligent, ambitious, and well-liked among her peers. She had recently moved to Copenhagen, where she was enjoying the independence of student life. She spent time in the city's cultural circles, attending social gatherings, and engaging with people from various backgrounds. The year was 1990, and Copenhagen was a city known for its artistic and intellectual vibrancy. The Pissarenden district, located in the central part of the city, was a hub for students, musicians, and young professionals. It was an area known for its cafes, bookshops, and nightlife, attracting a mix of locals and visitors. Despite its reputation as a lively and somewhat bohemian neighborhood, it was not considered dangerous. People felt safe walking the streets late at night, especially in the city center. June 4, 1990, was the second day of the annual Pinse Carnival, a major cultural event in Copenhagen. The festival brought thousands of people into the streets to enjoy music, parades, and open-air parties. Bars and restaurants stayed open late, and the atmosphere was celebratory. The city center was crowded with festival-goers, making it difficult to move through the streets. Many people were drinking, dancing, and socializing. It was the kind of night where strangers easily struck up conversations and new acquaintances were made. Anne was among the many young people out that evening. She had plans to meet friends and enjoy the festival. At the time, there was no reason to believe that this night would be any different from other social outings. There was no indication that she was in danger or that anything unusual would happen. But in just a few hours, she would be reported missing, and by the next day, her body would be found in a basement. The case would become one of Denmark's most notorious unsolved crimes. Investigators, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts would spend decades trying to piece together what happened to Anne Stine Geisler on that warm summer night in 1990. On the evening of June 4, 1990, Anne Stine Geisler was in the city center of Copenhagen, attending the Pinse Carnival. The festival attracted large crowds, filling the streets with people celebrating late into the night, and was last seen around the Pissarenden district, an area known for its bars, restaurants, and social scene. She had been out with friends earlier in the evening, but became separated from them at some point. Witnesses reported seeing her alone near a bar shortly before midnight. There were conflicting accounts about whether she was talking to anyone or if she appeared distressed. However, no one reported anything that suggested immediate danger. The streets were packed with festival-goers, making it difficult to track individual movements. At some point during the night, Anne entered a building on Tegelgardstræde, a narrow street in the city center. This building housed a restaurant, and beneath it was a basement used for storage. It was not a place where the public typically had access, leading to questions about how she ended up there. Investigators would later focus on determining whether she went inside willingly, if she was forced, or if someone lured her there. Anne never returned home that night. By the following morning, concern grew among her friends and family. She had not contacted anyone, and calls to her went unanswered. It was out of character for her to disappear without explanation. By the afternoon of June 5, 1990, her disappearance was reported to the police. Later that evening, a restaurant employee entered the basement on Tegelgardstræde. It was then that Anne's body was discovered. She had been brutally murdered. The scene showed clear signs of violence. Her body was partially covered, and initial observations suggested that she had suffered multiple injuries. Investigators arrived quickly, sealing off the area and collecting evidence. The news of the discovery spread rapidly. The crime scene was located in a busy part of the city, not far from where people were still celebrating the festival the night before. Word of the murder created fear and speculation. People who had been at the carnival began questioning whether they had seen anything unusual. The police started interviewing potential witnesses, trying to reconstruct Anne's last known movements. With the body found in a basement, investigators knew the crime had not taken place in a random public space. This led them to consider that the killer may have had access to the building. They worked on identifying employees, tenants, and anyone who might have been familiar with the location. The focus of the investigation quickly became whether Anne had been targeted by someone she knew or if she was the victim of an opportunistic attack. The discovery of her body marked the beginning of one of Denmark's most complex and frustrating murder investigations. Detectives now had to determine who had last seen Anne alive, how she ended up in that basement, and who was responsible for her death. After the discovery of Stine Geisler's body, the Copenhagen police launched a full-scale investigation. Vice Criminal Commissioner Ovdal was assigned to lead the case. Given the brutal nature of the crime and its location in a busy district, the pressure to find the perpetrator was immediate. The first step was securing the crime scene. Forensic experts examined the basement where Anne was found, looking for any physical evidence that could identify the killer. They collected fingerprints, fibers, and any biological material present. The condition of the body indicated that the crime had been violent, and investigators suspected she had been killed in the basement itself. However, the exact timeline of events leading up to her death was still unclear. On her arm, the police found a mark inscribed to her skin. This was first thought to be something like the signature of the killer, so the police were keen on finding out what the marks meant or who they could belong to. Police started reconstructing Anne's last known movements. Witnesses from the Pinsk Carnival were interviewed. Some remembered seeing her that night, but details were inconsistent. Some said she was alone, while others thought she had been speaking with an unknown man. None of the statements provided a clear lead. Surveillance footage was limited in 1990, making it difficult to track her movements through the city. Investigators also focused on the building where Anne's body was found. The basement was part of a restaurant, and they needed to determine who had access to it. They questioned employees, the restaurant owner, and people who lived in the area. It was unclear whether Anne had entered the building on her own or if someone had taken her there by force. The possibility that the killer was someone with access to the property was a key consideration. The autopsy provided additional details. It confirmed that Anne had suffered multiple injuries, indicating a violent struggle. The forensic team worked to determine if there was any DNA evidence that could identify the suspect. However, DNA analysis in 1990 was not as advanced as it is today, and results were limited. Despite extensive efforts, the investigation faced challenges. The crime had occurred during a festival, meaning there were thousands of people in the area that night. The large number of potential witnesses made it difficult to narrow down suspects. Additionally, because the streets were crowded, there was no immediate evidence of a clear suspect fleeing the scene. As days passed, the lack of a strong lead frustrated investigators. They continued to interview people connected to Anne, trying to determine if she had any conflicts or if someone in her social circle could be involved. However, no evidence pointed directly to a suspect. Then they found her diary and thought they could find some clues in it. She was known to meticulously write down every event that took place in her life, who she was hanging out with, where she was going, and what she was going to do each day. There were various names of friends she had been hanging out with and boys she was seeing or dating. One particular name struck a chord. It was the name of a 42-year-old journalist who she had started dating. Seeing such huge age gap between them, the police were interested in knowing if something else had been brewing in that relationship. He was called upon and thoroughly investigated, but in the end he had a good alibi for where he had been on the day she was murdered. With limited forensic technology and no immediate witnesses identifying a perpetrator, the case became increasingly difficult to solve. The police remained determined to find answers, but the investigation was already showing signs that it would not be resolved quickly. As news of Stine Geisler's murder spread, the media quickly seized on the case. Danish newspapers and television stations provided extensive coverage, highlighting the brutality of the crime and the mystery surrounding it. The fact that Anne was a young university student from a respected family only intensified public interest. The case dominated headlines, with journalists closely following every detail of the investigation. The tabloid magazine SEOGHR was particularly aggressive in its reporting. The publication ran multiple articles speculating about potential suspects and Anne's final hours. Some reports included unverified claims and anonymous sources, which frustrated both investigators and Anne's family. Other media outlets focused on the broader issue of safety in Copenhagen, questioning whether the city's nightlife had become dangerous. Public reaction was immediate. Many people who had attended the Pinsk Carnival were shaken by the murder. The festival was supposed to be a time of celebration, but now it was associated with a violent crime. Residents of the Pisarindon district expressed concern that such a brutal act had occurred in an area where people typically felt safe. Some business owners worried that the case would damage the neighborhood's reputation. As police continued their investigation, they faced increasing pressure to make an arrest. The public wanted answers, and the lack of progress led to frustration. Some people began speculating about possible suspects, with theories circulating in newspapers and among locals. The pressure on law enforcement was compounded by the fact that, despite extensive efforts, no clear suspect had been identified. Anne's family largely stayed out of the public eye, but they issued a statement through the police, asking for privacy and urging anyone with information to come forward. Friends and classmates at Aarhus University were in shock. A memorial service was held in her honor, with hundreds of people in attendance. Despite the intense media attention, the investigation remained stalled. The coverage generated numerous tips from the public, but none led to a breakthrough. Detectives continued to pursue leads, but without physical evidence or a key witness, the case was not moving forward as quickly as expected. By the end of 1990, the initial wave of media coverage began to slow down. While updates on the case still appeared in the news, the lack of progress meant that public attention gradually shifted to other stories. However, for investigators and those close to Anne, the case remained a top priority. They were determined to find the person responsible, even as the trail began to grow cold. In the months following Stine Geisler's murder, investigators continued to work through every possible lead. The case had initially received a large amount of public attention, which resulted in hundreds of tips. Some people reported seeing Anne on the night of the carnival, while others claimed to have information about potential suspects. However, as each tip was investigated, none led to a clear breakthrough. Police conducted multiple interviews with people connected to Anne. They questioned her friends, classmates, and acquaintances to determine if she had any conflicts or relationships that could be relevant to the case. There was no evidence that she had been involved in any dangerous situations before her death. No one reported that she had received threats or expressed concerns about anyone following her. She had no known enemies. Detectives also re-examined the crime scene and the basement where Anne was found. The forensic evidence collected was limited by the technology available at the time. They had fingerprints and some biological material, but DNA analysis was not as advanced as it is today. The possibility that the killer's DNA was present could not be ruled out, but without a suspect to compare it to, it was not immediately useful. One theory investigators considered was that Anne had been followed by an unknown attacker after leaving the carnival. Some witnesses had mentioned seeing a man with short dark hair and black pants standing in front of the restaurant at some point. Others mentioned seeing him standing around the entrance of the basement as well. A neighbor had also mentioned seeing a man with short dark hair and black pants in front of her house on one occasion. But in the end, the police couldn't find anyone who fit that description. However, no witnesses reported seeing her being pursued or in distress. Another possibility was that she had willingly entered the basement, either with someone she knew or with a stranger who convinced her to go inside. The exact circumstances of how she ended up there remained uncertain. The police also explored whether the crime could be linked to other unsolved cases. They looked at recent violent crimes in Copenhagen and surrounding areas, searching for patterns. However, they found no direct connections between Anne's murder and any other known cases. As time passed, leads grew colder. The case remained open, but without new evidence, progress was slow. Investigators periodically reviewed the case files, hoping that advances in forensic science might eventually provide new insights. However, as the years went by, the likelihood of an arrest diminished. For Anne's family, the lack of answers was devastating. They had lost a daughter, and the person responsible remained unidentified. The case continued to be discussed in the media occasionally, especially on anniversaries of Anne's death, but there were no major developments. Eventually, the case was classified as a cold case. It remained open, meaning that if new evidence emerged, it could still be investigated. However, unless someone came forward with new information or forensic technology advanced enough to provide a breakthrough, the identity of Anne's killer would remain unknown. Despite the case being classified as a cold case, Stine Geisler's murder was never forgotten. Over the years, investigators periodically revisited the case, hoping that advancements in forensic technology could provide new leads. By the early 2000s, DNA analysis had significantly improved, allowing law enforcement to revisit old evidence. The biological material collected from the crime scene was re-examined to determine if a suspect could now be identified. However, without a direct match in police databases, the results did not lead to an arrest. The case continued to be a subject of public interest. True crime documentaries and books revisited the events of June 4, 1990. One of the most notable accounts came from journalist Soren Bostrup, whose book Unravel I Den Lysnat examined the case in detail. The book explored potential suspects and questioned whether critical leads had been overlooked during the initial investigation. It also raised concerns about how forensic evidence had been handled at the time. The renewed attention brought Anne's story back into the public eye, leading to discussions about whether police should take another look at the case. With modern forensic databases expanding, there was also hope that international cooperation could lead to new discoveries. Danish authorities reviewed the case in connection with violent offenders from other countries, checking for any similarities in method or location. However, no conclusive links were found. Meanwhile, investigators encouraged the public to come forward with any information, no matter how small. Cases decades old had been solved before by new witness testimonies, and detectives believed that someone may have known more than they had originally shared. In some cases, people hesitate to speak out at the time of an investigation, but later feel compelled to tell the truth. Despite this renewed effort, no one came forward with new, verifiable details. The years continued to pass, but Anne's case remained one of Denmark's most well-known unsolved crimes. Her family and those close to her never stopped seeking answers. Law enforcement has stated that the case will always remain open for review, and any new evidence will be investigated. Advances in forensic technology could still provide a path toward identifying the perpetrator in the future. For now, the identity of Stine Geisler's killer remains unknown. The crime stands as a haunting reminder of an unsolved tragedy that took place in the heart of Copenhagen during a night of celebration. Unless new evidence emerges or a witness comes forward, the question of who killed Stine Geisler remains unanswered. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to be notified as we add new videos daily. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.